Today's lesson is on adding integers, and it covers pages 135 and 136. Yesterday, we looked at integers, so negative and positive numbers, and the day before we looked at losses and gains. So now we're going to combine the two for question 1. So they are telling you that a negative integer is like a loss, and a positive integer is like a gain. They're going to ask you to write the gain or loss represented by the integer. So in the first example, A, where they give us -6, negative is a loss, so we would write loss of, and then our number 6. So if it's positive, it will be a gain of blank, negative, loss of blank. Now, just as we get to question 2, they're going to let us know that any sequence of gains and losses can be written as a sum of integers. So remember, sum is the answer to an addition question. So when we rewrite this sentence, we're actually going to group all of the integers with their signs, the numbers with their negative or positive sign. So in brackets, we'll put -3 plus +4 plus -5. So really what we're doing is just grouping it together, okay? And then when we are adding a positive number, like we have here, the two positive numbers can actually kind of be combined into one. So we'll just leave brackets around the negative numbers, and then it'll just be +4 plus -5. So just a reminder to go from the first step to the second step, it's just the negatives that keep their brackets. And then we combine the two plus signs. So for question 2, we'll look at each number separately. So when we look at +4, it's positive, so it doesn't need brackets. And we doesn't actually need an addition sign because it's at the beginning. Okay, if it was negative, it would. And then we need our -3. So we're adding things. So we're adding -3. It's negative, so it needs a bracket and to keep its sign. Then we're going to add, our last one is -5. And because it's negative, it needs to go in the brackets as well. In this question, they're almost asking us to do the opposite. So it says to write each sum as a sequence of gains and losses. So now we're going to get rid of the addition sign in between and just put our sequence. So because this is gains and losses, all of our gains need a positive and all our losses need a negative. So I'm still going to write +2 even though it's at the beginning because they're asking for a gain. That's why I need to have that plus sign there before the 2. And then -7 for the loss. +2 minus 7. So this is how we would show gains and losses as opposed to the sums that are over here. Question 4 asks us to add the integers by first writing them as a sequence of gains and losses. So first we would look at, so our +5 is going to stay as +5, and then our -2 will stay as -2. We're basically just eliminating the brackets and the plus sign in the middle. Now, if you gain 5 and lost 2, I'm sure that you could tell me that that means overall you have a gain of 3. But I also want to introduce a new strategy just to help you if you need a different way of thinking about it. This strategy is going to use integer chips. So all of my blue circles are going to be positive numbers, and all of my red circles are going to be negative. So I'm going to start by drawing my first 2 integers. So I'm going to draw +5, so that means I need 5 blue chips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I need to have 2 negative chips. So there's my loss of 2. Now, the last step is that you group the ones that line up. So do you see how these almost make a matching set? We've got 2 positives and 2 negatives. Now, this is what we're going to learn in the next question is opposite integers. I also sometimes call them zero pairs. If you put +2 and -2 together, it would make 0. So they basically cancel each other out and we are left with 3 positive, which is our answer. So this is just a different way of looking at it. So here's another example. I don't know why I called it B because it's actually G. So we'll just fix that up quickly. So we need to start by writing these as gains and losses. So +5 is going to become +5. -2 will stay -2. +3 will stay +3, right? We're just taking out the brackets and the in-between integers. Now, the way they've done this is they have combined their positive integers first. Okay? So if you have 5 positive and 3 positive, you have 8 positive. So that's how they got that first. And then they have their leftover negative, so -2. Okay? That's where they got the +8 from and the -2. And then if you gain 8 and lose 2, you have an overall gain of +6. To see what that would look like with integer chips, we would start with our 5 positives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we draw our 2 negatives underneath. And then we need 3 more positives. So I'm actually going to line those up with the other positives there. And then we find our 0 pair. Well, these ones cancel each other out. So I am left with 6 positive chips, which means I have +6. So for question 5, they're going to review that integers that add to 0 are called opposite integers, or sometimes I call them 0 pairs. So if we look at this example, +3 plus -3, if we just write them as gains and losses, gain of 3, loss of 3. If you gain 3 and lose 3, you end up with 0. They'll give you questions such as the opposite of 4 is, well, 4 is an invisible positive, so the opposite is -4. So basically if it has a negative, the opposite is positive, right? It's going that way like they'd be mirrors on the number line. The other thing that you have to think of though is the opposite of 0. So 0 does not have a positive or a negative. So the opposite of 0 is like 0, or it doesn't really have an opposite. Question number 6 is going to ask you to cancel the opposite integers and add. So, for example, if we have our +5 and our -5, they're opposite integers, so they cancel out, and we're left with +3. Question 7 asks you to write each number as a sum, so addition sentence of positive ones and negative ones, and then find the sum by canceling the pairs. This is basically using +1s and -1s to show integer chips, but I'm going to show you how they demonstrate it. So their first example is +4 plus -2 is something. So we need to write +4 as a sum of +1s. So gain of 1, gain of 1, gain of 1, gain of 1, and then -2 as a sum of -1s. So I need 2 -1s. Then I start canceling them out. So I go, okay, here is one pair, here is another pair. I am left with 2 positives, so 1 plus 1 is a gain of 2. Now, I apologize in advance because number 8, they're going to try to make really confusing. So I will sort out how to do all of their stuff, but this is why I love integer chips, because they're just a little bit easier. So their first question is plus 5 plus negative 6. So they're asking you to add the integers mentally and start by writing a plus or a minus to show if you have a net gain or loss. So the first thing I would ask when trying to do this mentally, and they say to start by writing a plus or a negative, is to look and go, is the biggest numeral positive or negative? So we have a 5 and we have a 6. Now, if we ignore the pluses and minuses, 6 is a bigger number than 5. So this is my bigger numeral, and it is negative. Whichever numeral is bigger is what sign your answer will have. Okay, so if the negative is bigger, the negative will be in the answer. If the positive is bigger, the positive will be in the answer. This is only the case for adding, okay? Only the case for adding. Now, we can then go, okay, well, if I gain 5 and I lose 6, I've lost the 5 I've originally had, and I've still lost 1 more. So it is -1. If I wanted to confirm this using integer chips, I would need 5 positives, and I would need 6 negatives, and I'd have a group of 5 that would cancel each other out and be left with 1 negative, which is what I've given as my answer. So that does confirm it. Now, if we're adding 2 positives, I can still look and say, is the biggest numeral a positive or a negative? Well, I've got a 3 and I've got a 5. A 5 is bigger and it is positive. Now, if I gain 3 and I gain 5 more, I have gained 8. And I could confirm this with my integer chips. I've got 3 positives, and then I have 5 more positives. Together that makes 8 positives. Now if I were to add 2 negatives, I'd still use my same initial question. What's my bigger numeral, 4 or 6? 6 is. So it starts with a negative. And if I have -4 and -6, I've lost even more. So I'm going to get a larger negative, if that makes sense. So if I lose 4, I lose 6 more. Altogether, I have lost 10. And I can confirm this by going, here's my 4 negatives, and then I add 6 more negatives. That gives me 10 negatives. Question 9 is going to ask you a couple of true or false questions. So the first one is, the sum of 2 negative integers is negative. So here's 2 negative integers. We got a negative. That would make it seem like it's true, but you need to go through question 8 and look at all of the examples. Is it always true? Okay, if it's not always true, then it's false. But if you look, see if it's always a negative. For question B, if you add a negative integer to a positive integer, the sum is negative. Well, here we have a negative integer and a positive integer. We got a negative. So just from this example, it might seem true, but you need to go and look at every single one of them. Will it always be true? If it is not always true, you need to circle false. When you have finished your work and you have marked it, you can fill out the Google form. Remember to hit submit and mark as done, and you can always ask me for help if you need to go over a lesson.